Did you know you can create your own version of ChatGPT? You can customize it. In fact, Larry Roberts is one of the first out of the gate to do so. He's got a special version just for podcasters, help you launch and grow. And he's here. We're going to talk to him next, only on the StreamLeader Report. Let's do a show.
It's time for the StreamLeader Report. Discover the hottest trends in digital media. Here's your host, Ross Brand.
All right, thank you, Jody Krangle. There's a major omission that I noticed. I was been thinking about this for a while, and I've had a lot of guests on over the years. I'm not saying that to brag in any way. It's just reality. I've been doing this since 2015, and almost anybody in the space who's doing good things, I feel like I've had them on. Maybe if they're relatively new, I haven't. But we've had a lot of people on over the years. And it had been bothering me, like when I go to my guest page here on Livestream Universe, and I list some of the people that I've had on, and there's a major omission here. There's no Larry Roberts. It's an outrage. It's a disgrace. I'm ashamed that I have not had Larry Roberts on yet. And so I have been meaning over the last 3 or 4 months to do something about that. And, I tend to follow the news and what people are up to and what's going on and when's a good time. And so Larry now has a really cool thing going on. He has got a version of ChatGPT for podcasters, and I can't wait to talk to him about everything to do with ChatGPT, but in particular, how you can create a customized version, why you would create a customized version, and how podcasters can take advantage of the customized version that he's put together. The other thing I want to talk to Larry about as well is he's built a powerful brand, and you've seen his visibility and his influence, if I could quote a Joey Garrity term, visibility and influence, growing in a massive way over the last several years. Want to get a little insight into how he's done that. He's also speaking all over the country, and he's got a book, he's got a podcast, he's doing it all, and I'm thrilled, really thrilled. It's an honor to welcome the great Larry Roberts to the StreamLeader Report. Larry, thanks for joining us.
Look, and right out the gate, boy, I had my Rodecaster muted so that I didn't make any inadvertent noises, and you introduced me, and being the professional that I came in muted, so that was awesome. Thank you. No, that was an amazing introduction, Ross. Thank you so much for having me here. This is awesome. And when I saw that list of guests, I knew most of them. So it's really an honor to finally make it to the wall of fame of the Ross Brand StreamLeader Report.
Well, it's great to have you on. It's a perfect time, really, with the launch of PodcastersGPT. And you've been really a leader in terms of getting the message out to everybody about how podcasters and other creators can use ChatGPT. And not everybody's, on the cutting edge of this. I'm certainly following along and trying to learn a little bit as I go along. So let's start with really simple. What is ChatGPT, and why should a content creator, an entrepreneur, somebody who spends their time online in a business or in one of the different digital media fields, why should they care about ChatGPT? Why should they learn it and know about it?
First and foremost, ChatGPT, it's just that. It's a chat platform. Mm-hmm. A lot of people don't know that the GPT stands for Generative Pre-trained Transformer. And that's a real fancy way of saying that ChatGPT takes input from a user, whether it's a question or a command, then transforms that question or command and generates an output based on pre-trained data. So there's how that GPT comes into play. That just means you can literally have a conversation with this tool about any topic that you want to. Why should content creators be aware of it, and why should they leverage it? Because it saves us that one thing that so many content creators struggle with, and that's time. It's finding the time to create our content. I work with a lot of podcasters. I launch podcasts for a living, and I find so often that people launch a show and they love it. They're passionate about it. They're passionate about their topic, but they go, oh my gosh, this is a lot of work. This takes a lot of time. And with tools like ChatGPT and a variety of other AI platforms that are out there today, you can streamline that process, minimize the overall time investment, and get higher quality, more detailed, and more focused content for your audience.
Well, you're absolutely right. It's a lot of work, and it's a lot of work that goes beyond the planning, recording, and promoting the episode, although those things themselves can be a fair amount of work. What are some of the best ways, if you could roll off maybe 2 or 3 ways that ChatGPT can speed your time to market with getting a podcast episode out, getting it promoted, getting the blog post done, whatever it is you need to do to get your podcast out each week or on whatever schedule you might be on?
Sure. And you kind of hit the nail on the head with a couple of them right there, but I still use it very often for ideation. After you do a podcast for so long about a particular topic or in a focused niche, like my podcast is called Branded. It's all about building personal and professional brands. So after doing, I don't know, even 25, 30 episodes, you're going, all right, I've pretty much talked about everything there is to talk about branding. So what do? We go to ChatGPT. We say, hey, give us some podcast episode ideas for a podcast about personal branding. Next thing you know, I have a dozen, 20 plus episode ideas, concepts for those episodes, titles for those episodes, a synopsis for those episodes. And if nothing else, it's an excellent tool for brainstorming type sessions. Now, once you've recorded your podcast or written your blog post, how do you market that thing? From a podcast perspective, what do we name each and every episode? That can be very time consuming. Excuse me. I actually do have a throat lozenge as well, but I have to clear my throat. I apologize. That can be super time consuming, and it can be super difficult to keep coming up with really focused titles for our podcast episodes. So that's one of the things that I use ChatGPT for as well. Generating titles for each episode, eye-catching, hook-laced titles, meaning, it's a title that's going to hook someone that would potentially listen to your show. So it's great for doing that. Ross, you mentioned blog post. Excellent platform for writing show notes or a synopsis of your episode. Great for writing blog posts. Great for writing social media posts. And with the latest iteration of ChatGPT that just dropped, we go beyond text-based output now. Now we can generate images directly in ChatGPT as well.
Now, are you doing that using DALL-E 3, which is an image creation plugin, maybe you would call it, or portion of ChatGPT? It's by the same creators, or you getting images right from your ChatGPT?
You're getting it directly from ChatGPT, but you're getting it from ChatGPT, but it's due to the DALL-E 3 integration.
Oh,
so
okay.
You don't have to use a plugin. You don't even have to select that you're using DALL-E 3 anymore, as long as you have the paid version of ChatGPT. You go in, and depending on the prompt, ChatGPT is now smart enough to know whether you're looking for text-based output or image-based output. So it makes that decision for you. So now you just go prompt. Depending on what you want, that's what you're going to get as the output.
Well, you mentioned prompts, and there's the term prompt engineering that we hear about. How does one get good at understanding how to put the right inputs into ChatGPT to get a useful output that you can use for your podcast, for your blog post, for promotion, for social media, whatever it is you're trying to accomplish at that time?
Yeah, that's really been a challenge over the last year. And if we look back to June is when ChatGPT saw peak usage. And after June, we've started seeing some of the user base decline, not significantly, but there's definitely been people that are dropping off of the platform. And I think a lot of that is due they say a lot of it's due to the fact that school was out.
Right.
And the vast majority of users for ChatGPT are between 18 and 35. So, and even some of the younger school kids now, because I do some consulting for the State Board of Education here in Texas. And every teacher that I talk to, they're like, man, all the students are using ChatGPT for their homework. How do we stop it? Well, the bottom line is you don't, but that's a whole nother episode of the podcast. But it's cool now because prompt engineering was definitely a challenge. ChatGPT, here we are. It's the 17th of November. It came out the 20th of November last year. So we're coming up on the 1-year anniversary. And when it first dropped, understanding how to prompt was a big challenge. But one of the key things is be very, very clear with your prompts. Be very, very concise with your prompts. Tell ChatGPT exactly what this prompt is looking to do, who you're looking to do it for, and what that messaging needs to be. I always refer to ChatGPT as a brilliant toddler because ChatGPT has all the answers, but it doesn't understand context. It doesn't understand emotion. There could be some bias that's natively in the output from ChatGPT that we have to be aware of. It doesn't understand culture or cultural implications of the results of the data that it provides you. So we, as the humans, this is where that human element still comes into play. We have to give it that information. We have to shape our queries or our input or our prompts in a way that fills in all of those blanks for ChatGPT. That way we get the answers back that we're pretty much already anticipating.
So now you've come up with your own version. It's called PodcastersGPT, a personalized podcast launch and growth assistant. Tell us why you would want to use a customized solution like this as opposed to just using the general version of ChatGPT.
Sure. And this kind of goes back to the prompt engineering. You don't have to understand prompt engineering now. There's so many new features and benefits in ChatGPT that allow you to simply ask a question, just like you and I are having a conversation right now. And for PodcastersGPT, I designed this version of ChatGPT to specifically help podcasters do one of two things. Either it's wannabe or new podcasters launch a new show. So given industry standards and best practices, those are embedded in PodcastersGPT. New podcasters can ask PodcastersGPT specific questions on what they should do when launching a show. How should they title their show? How should they write their description? They can also generate cover art for their podcast directly in PodcastersGPT as well.
I've tried that several times. Haven't quite gotten there with it yet. But
I'll be honest. We're still... I still say it's early in the image generation phase. And I've never been a big proponent over this last year that I've been traveling the country talking about ChatGPT. You very rarely hear me talk about image generation at all. And there's the reason for that, Ross, is because probably I got very similar results to what you've been getting as well. But with DALL-E 3, I've seen that the results are getting to where they're actually applicable. And that's the biggest thing. You could use a Midjourney or an Adobe Firefly and generate some really, really cool looking images. But that's about it. They're cool looking.
Right.
They're not functional. You can't really use them per se. I mean, there's some...
They're not simple enough for a little tiny square where you need to get somebody's attention in 2 seconds. They're more like trying to be... more sophisticated artwork. And it's kind of hard to do that with a podcast cover, right?
100%. And, they still struggle somewhat with drawing hands and fingers and legs. Not uncommon to have 3 legs if you're asking for it to draw a person. Fonts and text have always been a challenge. DALL-E 3, however, is doing much better. And there's a thing called chain prompting. And that's basically taking the output from an initial prompt and then adding to that prompt based on the results of your first prompt. Did you follow that? Did that make sense?
So that's if you start a new chat with ChatGPT or a new thread, so to speak,
sure,
it learns as you go along so you can continue asking questions based, like it's got a really good short-term memory. Is that kind of what?
Chat,
yes,
100% within that.
You get outside
chat.
that, you kind of have to re-educate again, right?
And that's one of the benefits of PodcastersGPT is that language and that conversation is at the root of this version of ChatGPT, very podcast specific. I've also taken data and content that I've written and created, books that I've written, workbooks that I've created for podcasters to launch their shows, and I've appended that to the knowledge base of this particular version of ChatGPT. So when podcasters are coming in, they're getting that podcast-centric data for them. So that's what makes this so beneficial, especially for new users of an AI platform or a GPT-type platform.
Yeah, I do want to mention that in the description, if you're watching on YouTube, if you're listening on the podcast, or on X/Twitter, wherever you're listening, there's a description. Probably not on Twitter. We don't have enough characters. But come on over to YouTube if you're watching on Twitter. If you're listening on the podcast, wherever, look at the description. There is a link directly to Larry's Podcasters GPT. It's a kind of a weird link, so I can't, giving it on the air would make no sense. But look for that link there. There's also a link to Larry's latest book and his podcast and his website, redhatmedia.io, and everything, his socials. So he's got so much going on. But, I mean, this is really exciting, man. So for experienced people who've been podcasting for a while, know what it takes to launch, know what it takes to get out of the box, but maybe they've hit a plateau and they want to grow more. Maybe they're, like you said, starting to run out of ideas. How can they use Podcasters GPT? What are maybe some prompts or some different questions they should be asking to move to the next level with their podcast?
Sure. If you've already got an established show, maybe ask Podcasters GPT, how should I write my description for my podcast? How should I title my episodes for my podcast? What sort of content can I create that would attract a broader audience for my niche? And then specify your niche. How can I monetize my podcast? There's a variety of insight on how to monetize a podcast that goes way above and beyond just the traditional sponsorship model. Because Ross, I'm sure you know that, CPMs, they tend to hang around the $23 to $27 range per 1,000 downloads. And so many podcasters want to monetize their show with sponsors. And that's typically not the most effective way to do it. So if you have some questions about that, that's there for you in Podcasters GPT as well. So again, anything that has to do with attracting an audience, building your show, following industry best practices. One of the things that we do at Red Hat Media, and we sell a ton of them, are podcast audits, where we have established podcasters that are doing exactly that, Ross. They're struggling. They're having a hard time growing their show. They've reached a plateau and they just can't get beyond that plateau. And we go in and we analyze their podcast, and we end up writing about a 13 to 15 page ebook specifically about their podcast. And in doing that, we establish a ton of industry standards. We base everything that they're doing on data that we've gathered over the years and compare that data to what they're doing. And all of that information is in Podcasters GPT as well. So you can do your own podcast audit right there in Podcasters GPT.
So you could actually prompt that I want to do a podcast audit or what have you, and it would give you...
I didn't build that level of functionality in there because, well, that's a product offering, and I don't want to put myself out of business.
Hey,
but...
you just said you put it in there, so...
The answers are in there, but yeah. So if you took it segment by segment, if you look at different aspects of your podcast, again, analyze the cover art. You can have it analyze the cover art by uploading an image of your podcast to Podcasters GPT, and it'll analyze that image and talk to you about a variety of different aspects of that image. You can upload your description and ask for it to write a more robust description, SEO rich description for your podcast to attract a broader audience, leveraging podcast SEO best practices. You can upload information about your social media and the marketing campaigns you're using for your podcast. It'll analyze those campaigns and give you feedback on those as well. So from a segmented perspective, you could have it look at each part of your podcast. But no, I didn't embed the entire process of an audit in there.
So if somebody wants to work with you on that, redhatmedia.io would be the place to go?
Yes, sir.
Okay, sounds good. All right. So let's turn a little bit to your own journey, which is very interesting. I remember you speaking at different events during the pandemic in the beginning. Then Clubhouse came along. You kind of blew up on Clubhouse. Next thing I know, you're speaking 5 events a week. You're never home. You're traveling everywhere. You're on every show. You're collaborating with all different kinds of people. What? Tell us a little bit about the game plan that you don't have to give state secrets away, but the general approach that you've taken over the past 4 or 5 years to really burst on the scene and then really raise your profile to where you're now one of the real go-to speakers and guests for people who want to learn about podcasting, ChatGPT, or just have a great conversation during an event.
Man, it's been interesting for sure. And you kind of hit the nail on the head when you said the last 4 to 5 years, because that's about the time frame that I started speaking in the podcast industry. But if we look back at my corporate history, my corporate career, I started off as a corporate trainer for Texas Instruments. So facilitating and teaching and training, that's at the root of everything that I've ever done. I came right out of high school. I don't have a degree, so I'm not a real smart guy, but I'm a bit of a communicator. So that's helped me get to where I'm at today, is being able to communicate effectively with pretty much all walks of life. Again, I came right out of high school, dropped into selling cars. I went to one of the largest car dealerships back home and started selling Chrysler, Plymouth, Dodges, and even Jeep and Eagle products. And I'm dating myself because most people probably don't even know what an Eagle is. But I came out of that, sold for maybe a year and a half, and then I started training salespeople there at the dealership as well. So that kind of evolved over the years. I also was a wannabe tough guy throughout all my 20s and 30s, and was a fighter and a karate guy. At one point, I owned my own karate school. So once again, found myself in a facilitation type role, teaching and training fighters and coaching fighters and being a wannabe fighter myself. So then I realized, though, that I was never going to make it to the Ultimate Fighting Championship, and thought, wow, I got to get a real job. So,
note to self, don't mess with Larry next time you see him at Podfest.
Bro, I just got out of the hospital 3 weeks ago because I looked to the left. That is all that it took to put me in the hospital for 3.5 days. My whole neck just locked up. And I had flown to Tampa, and I got off the plane. Chris Kremitzos, the founder of Podfest and also a partner of mine within Podfest, met me at the airport. As soon as I saw him, dude, I just broke into tears because I was in so much pain.
Oh, wow.
But it was that's all I did. I was in my car and I went, is there anything coming? And my neck just said, nope, not today. And I still don't have full range of motion, and it's been a month since that happened. So yeah, you can mess with me all you want. I'm very fragile at 51. So, but I left the karate business and ended up going to Texas Instruments. And that's where I was a corporate trainer, leveraged that to get a training position with the company in Dallas. That was supposed to be a pit stop for a couple of years to get a little more experience, moving into more of an HR role, turned into a 21-year career that I left January 4th of 2021. And now I've been doing this full time since January of 21. So, but it really started speaking probably around 18, 19, something like that. I started with some very, very small, really local Dallas-Fort Worth virtual events. And I appreciate the opportunity that Tim Gillette gave me to come on his show. And he would do these on the weekend. And I really didn't know what I was getting into or how I was supposed to be doing it. But man, I came in there with gusto. And these events were streamed on Facebook. Right. And if you've ever live streamed on Facebook, which Ross, I know you have, you can look in that top left-hand corner on Facebook when you're live, and you can see how many people are watching. And the vast majority of the time, that was that big goose egg. But it was still an opportunity and a platform for me to start understanding the podcast space and understanding the content behind creating valuable content. So as I continued to hone my skills on these small virtual events, larger virtual events started opening themselves up to me. And I started doing it on those events. And then from there, small live stages actually started opening up, then bigger stages and bigger stages. And now speaking is one of my primary sources of income behind my business. So that was the evolutionary process, very high level overview, but that's how it all got started, man.
So speaking's been the key for you. If you would say one thing is it's been saying yes a lot to speaking opportunities.
Yes, that's exactly right. And there's over the last probably 3 years, especially, there's very few, if any, that I have said no to. I think I've been on every podcast conference stage from California to New York and everywhere in between. I speak at local events and local networking events here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. I belong to several large networking organizations in Dallas-Fort Worth. I'm a member of the eWomen's Network, which is a global organization as well that's specifically for women entrepreneurs, female entrepreneurs. So I speak at their events as well. Entrepreneurs organization, I've grown into speaking for them as well. So speaking has really, really taken off for me, and that's been extremely beneficial. You know, a lot of people think the red hat is really everything that's built the brand, but it's saying yes that's really built the brand. The red hat just helps it stand out a little bit.
What do you learn from speaking in person that you don't get from speaking at a virtual event, doing an online conversation or online education? What do you find is, a key to giving a good in-person event? A lot of people have their in-person muscle hasn't been flexed for a
Yeah.
few years now.
Yeah.
As somebody who's out there doing it, what do you think the differences are?
Well, I think the biggest thing is, one, for me, getting on stage. It's an event.
Mhm.
It's just such a rush. And I was talking about my fighting days. I was on a podcast the other day, and I was talking about my journey because I loved fighting in the ring or the cage, and it was such a rush. I mean, there was no rush beyond getting in there and competing. And then it was even better when you got your hand raised. But when I started speaking in front of audiences of 2, 3, 4, 500 people, I realized that it was that same rush. I get those same nerves as I'm to the side of the stage as they're introducing me. The butterflies are going, the adrenaline's pumping, the dopamine's hitting hardcore. And I
Mhm.
get up on stage and I have that opportunity to engage with that audience. And as a speaker, I prefer to directly engage with my audience. I love crowd work. I love going up, and I have always a preformed talk, and we've got a presentation that we're doing, but I like to get the crowd involved, and that's where I excel, and that's where I have the most fun, is interacting with that live audience. So for me, that's the big difference, is I get that rush, and then when I get up there and I engage with the audience, and I'm confident that they took some value out of what I presented from the stage, it's the exact same as when I wrap that talk and walk off stage, as it felt to get my hand raised every time I was lucky enough to be the winner in the ring or the cage. So they were telling me I need to write a book talking about going from cage to stage, because it feels the exact same way for me.
It's a great way to put it. I felt the same way when I got into radio in my mid-20s. Um, to me, it was like an extension of playing sports. It was
Yeah.
just like, okay, the game's on. It's preparation. It's intensity. I was doing sports, and I was doing games, and there was times like I would go into the bathroom at halftime and give myself a halftime speech, like, okay, the first half you were a little shaky, to be honest, but fuck it, it doesn't matter. Excuse my language. You're going to have a great second half, and
Yep.
that's going to be the tape that gets you the next job or whatever. And I go
Exactly.
back out like, you got to forget it. You got to be like a cornerback who just gave up a touchdown. You gotta go back. But I would do that stuff to pump myself up and to change the mindset.
It's so true. It's so true, because I mentioned that I got injured a month ago. Well, 2 weeks ago, I had a talk down in San Antonio for the State Board of Education, and I'm like, I'm still stiff. I still can't really move. I'm still in quite a bit of pain, but there was no way I could pass up this amazing opportunity. And I went up there, and I can promise you, it was not my best presentation. And as I came off that stage, I wasn't in a state of elation. I was
Right.
in I really screwed the pooch on that one. And it's really the exact same way. I still had to get off that stage and give myself that motivational speech. You go, man, you played injured. You went in, you still showed up for the game. It's the same concept, but you were definitely not, you weren't even operating I wasn't even operating at 50%, but I was up there still trying to give my best effort. So I can totally relate to that analogy. And I think it would be so cool. And that's what you don't get, at least I don't get, from the virtual gigs.
Mm.
I do love doing virtual events. I just did one yesterday, and it was amazing. The audience was asking questions. Everybody was engaged. The host, she did an amazing job. Megan Doherty just did Podcasters for Business yesterday, and I spoke there. It was a great event, and it felt really good. But it just does not compare to that live in-person action. And the cool thing too is, I'm a big fan of speaking on the first or second day of the event. If it's got a 3 or 4 day event, I want to speak like on day 1 or maybe day 2, but no later than day 2, because it puts you in a position of authority, and people want to have conversations with you. And that's been one of the biggest assets for growing my personal brand, is speaking on those early days. Now, another trick of the trade, I'm typically, especially with the eWomen's Network, I'm their anchor speaker for after lunch, because after lunch, what's happening?
Everybody's tired. Right?
Everybody's tired. They're full. They just had their favorite little sweet treat, whatever it may be, and they're kind of dozing off for the afternoon. So what do they need? They need somebody to come in there that has some energy, that's going to engage, that's going to get them involved and get that audience fired back up. And that's why every time I speak at eWomen's Network, they put me on right after lunch, because they need somebody with that energy to get people re-engaged. And that's amazing. That's an amazing feeling and an amazing opportunity. And it's really a compliment. And so I love that. I'm also, I might be a little ego driven, so, it feels good. What can I say?
Right.
So
right.
That's the big thing, man. I just love it. I love on stage speaking.
When you speak as much as you do, how many... you can't possibly be writing a customized speech for every single event. You must have a wrapper or a few general presentations that you tweak, but you're not starting from scratch each time, or are you?
Yeah, I learned that lesson, Ross, because I was starting from scratch every time. And because I'm like, well, I did this one at Podfest. I can't do it at Podcast Movement. I did this one at Outlier. I can't do it at whatever other podcast conference it may be. They've seen it.
Right.
So I would do every one. And I've probably got, I don't know, I've got an entire library on my other machine in my development office in the other room. I don't know, 50, 60 talks that I've done. But especially this year, I really started doing exactly what you're talking about, just putting an external wrapper on most things, and especially when it comes to AI. AI, and when I talk about AI, 90% of what I talk about is ChatGPT. And there's a reason for that, not just to make my speaking easier, but because in my personal opinion, when it comes to GPT or generative type content, ChatGPT is the industry leader. Now, granted, you have Bard, you've got Bing, and you've got Claude, you've got some others that are out there, but ChatGPT is really the leader in the industry, and they proved that again with their latest drop that they just did 2 weeks ago. And for some people, I think it's even still rolling out. But so I have that opportunity to primarily discuss ChatGPT and the features and the functionality of ChatGPT, but then I add some specificity depending on the audience. So I have like AI for entrepreneurs when I speak to EO. I had AI for education when I talk to the state of Texas. I have AI for podcasters when I do a podcasting conference. So yeah, a lot of it's very, very similar in that regard, with just some minor tweaks to drive home that specific audience that I'm talking to. So that was a very difficult lesson to learn, but yeah, you just have to, if you're speaking someplace different, literally every week, sometimes twice a week, you just don't have the time to sit and custom develop presentations for each and every talk that you're doing.
Well, when it comes to custom developing, you did develop your own version of ChatGPT for podcasters. What is involved in developing, from a high level, what is involved in developing your own version? How would somebody go about doing that in their niche, in their area of expertise?
Sure. And, as cool as it sounds, it's not that difficult. You do have to have the paid version of ChatGPT. So that's one of the precursors. You have to be there, and you have to have the latest version. The way to tell if you have the latest version of ChatGPT, if you're a paid customer, is you can look in the top left-hand corner of your screen, and you're going to notice that actually the layout looks a little bit different. Not extremely different, but it's a little different. The left now is the column is black. All of your history of your chats are over there in white now. But if you've got the latest version, at the very top, you're going to see 4 little squares that kind of looks like a window, and it's going to say Explore. And if you have that, then you've got the latest version of ChatGPT.
Got it.
So if you click on that Explore button, what's going to happen is it's going to take you to a list of customized GPTs that OpenAI has developed as example GPTs for users to use and play with and get familiar with these very specialized versions of ChatGPT. You'll notice I think there's a recipe assistant, there's a sticker generator, there's games instructions GPT. If you go there and you want to play a board game of any sort, it'll tell you how to play the game. Card games, you name it, it'll tell you how to play each and every one of those games. So they've been really, they drill down into very specific niche in each one of those. I think there's 15 or 20 of them. I don't think I've actually counted them, but there's about 15 or 20 there. So if you look at the top of that list, you'll see an opportunity to create your own.
And so you can go through the ones that OpenAI has done, and then that serves as sort of a model of how to set up your own.
It'll show an example. It doesn't necessarily walk you through the steps of building your own custom GPT, but at a very high level, you can click on that plus node at the top of the list there. And there's two different tabs once you get inside that create. The first tab is the conversational tab. You can literally build a custom GPT just by having a conversation with ChatGPT.
Wow.
Now, if you click on the tab that's next to it, it's a configure tab. That configure tab allows you to give it an image or an icon, an identifying icon. You can give it a name to your GPT. You can write the description of your GPT. You can decide what functionality you want that GPT to have. Is it only text-based? Do you want to include DALL-E 3 functionality? Do you want to include code writing or code interpreter functionality? There's 3 check boxes for that. And then there's some additional actions. So that will allow you to really customize the look and feel. Now, there's another button there that I believe, and I'm not looking at the screen right now, but right below the description, there's an upload button as well, where you can add additional knowledge to this custom GPT. That's where you can upload your custom files, your custom knowledge base to this GPT to really dial it in and really make it specific directly to you. Make it sound exactly like you. Give it your voice so that the responses it's giving are based on your books. Ross, you have your 100 live streaming prediction books. So if you were to take those predictions, if you wanted to, put them in a PDF and upload that to a knowledge base or a GPT, you could do exactly that. So you could have 100 live stream GPT prediction, live stream predictions GPT, or something along those lines. So that's where you can add that additional knowledge base. You can do spreadsheets, you can do documents. You can do just about anything there as far as adding additional knowledge to that, or even customized knowledge to that GPT. Then you have the opportunity, I believe it's in the top right-hand corner, to publish it. You can publish it and save it directly to only you, so only you have access to it, which I highly recommend you do for testing purposes. Make sure that it's doing what you want it to do before you throw it out to the public. But then you can also publish it publicly, meaning anybody with ChatGPT's paid GPT Plus has access to that. Now, they're going to introduce a GPT store where you can actually publish it to the store. And while they haven't released the details yet, there will be a profit sharing model of some sort where you can start selling your customized GPTs. So that's going to be kind of cool, kind of looking at it as the app store. So this is kind of that app development for podcasters, for ChatGPT. And there's no telling where this is going to take.
So it's a great time to get started, practice with it, at least set it private in the beginning and do it yourself. And then, like you did, put it out on Facebook or your socials and let people try it out and get some feedback, right?
Yeah, I had to, because you got to be first to market with these things, Ross. Since I've released mine, I've seen several other people come out with podcast-related GPTs. But to my knowledge, mine was the first one that I saw out there. And that was the goal, because this thing's, it's only been out, for some people, it's only been out a couple of days. For others, it's been out at the most a week and a half, 2 weeks. So this is brand new functionality that they just introduced.
And you did yours a combination of uploading content and documents and also asking questions, or you stick totally on the create side rather than the
I did a combination of the two. Okay. So I wanted to leverage the large language model behind ChatGPT, but then I wanted to tailor fit that to my specific audience and my types of responses. So I added my own custom documentation as well.
Okay, so when you ask a question, let's say, and you get an answer from you get an answer there from ChatGPT, right? Of say some of the common questions somebody would have about podcasting. You're tailoring that answer based on the PDFs and things you upload, or are you going into that answer and actually editing it or making changes right within the answer?
No, ChatGPT looks at my knowledge base first, then combines that with the large language model, then answers the question.
Okay. Do you mind, I know this is off the cuff, but would you mind sharing your screen and just kind of walking through from the user end how somebody would go about using your version of ChatGPT, PodcastersGPT?
We can definitely do that. Share screen here.
While Larry brings that up, I'll mention again, you can find him and all his services at redhatmedia.io. He's also got a book on Amazon, a new book that he co-authored called, what is it called? It's called
DIY Podcast Workbook.
There
It's
you
launching
go.
your own podcast.
There you go. I know it's a long name. And then he's got the branded podcast, which are, what, about 25, 30 episodes into
we're
now?
somewhere in that neighborhood. Yeah, and the book and the podcast both. Or my podcast is co-hosted with Sarah Losi, and Sarah was also co-author of the workbook. So we tend to work together quite a bit. Now, I also have my own book that's coming out called Under the Red Hat, How to Stand Out in a Crowded Marketplace. So that should be out in the next couple of weeks. And I do have a sign up for that as well. If you go to redhatmedia.io/book, you can jump on the mailing list and be one of the first recipients of Under the Red Hat when it launches here in the next couple of weeks.
Very nice. All right. So we have PodcastersGPT, a personalized podcast launch and growth assistant. This is Larry's own creation.
Yeah, so what we got here, and I've actually got a couple of example prompts that I built into it as well, because if you're a new user to ChatGPT, Ross, this goes back to your question, how do I even write these prompts?
Mm-hmm.
And you'll notice these are very, very simple. So we're just going to click on this one. I want to start a podcast. What are the industry best practices I need to follow? So then right out the gate, PodcastersGPT starts laying out a go-live plan specifically for your podcast. What do I need to do? What's week one? Pick a podcast name. Research that name availability. Identify your unique proposition. Define your target audience. Week two, design and description. Let's design some cover art, which you can do right here in PodcastersGPT as well. And if you want, it'll be kind of fun. I'd like to see how it does again, because I did this yesterday. As I mentioned in the Podcasting for Business virtual event that happened, we actually tried to design some cover art. And I think Megan gave me she wanted to do a podcast called The Amazing Pickle. And so we created some cover art for a podcast called The Amazing Pickle, and it was pretty funny. So I'd kind of like to see what that looks like today here for you as well. But you can see it goes through every step of how to start a podcast week by week. Then it talks about marketing and growth, technical setup, launch strategies. What are some of the promotional activities we can do? What are some post-launch activities? So very high level, but if you wanted to, you could actually now chain prompt by building on the output of this and say, expand on week one. This is something that I do all the time when I get results back from ChatGPT. I just say, because ChatGPT loves to give you bulleted responses.
Right.
If you ask it about something, it'll give you bullet points about some of the highlights of each one. And I go, well, expand on bullet point number 2. And I get a nice in-depth description of exactly what that means. So if I go expand on design cover art, let's see what it does for us there. So then it comes right back and goes in depth on exactly what we need to do to design high quality cover art that's going to have an impact on our potential audience.
And again, this is taking a combination of the materials that you've provided to your customized GPT and the larger knowledge base that's out in the world.
Correct.
To expand on these. So basically, it looks to see what you have first, right? Because it's your customized, and then it fills in the gaps with what's out there. Is that how it more likely works?
When we go into depth, it starts digging into that large language model and the knowledge that it has, that it's learned over the years from being pre-trained on all of the data that it's read over the internet.
Right.
So that's exactly what it does.
It's amazing how fast the answers come back.
And it's going to get even faster. We're on the verge of having ChatGPT Turbo Edition come out, and it's even faster. It's going to be insane. And something cool too, if you're watching right now and you own your own business and you have a team of individuals, ChatGPT offers a subscription called ChatGPT Enterprise. And if you wanted to internally create your own custom GPTs that are specific to your business, even with some of your proprietary information and some of the tribal knowledge that only exists within your company, you can create custom GPTs that reflect that knowledge, and you can publish it only internally. So nobody else has access to it. One of the things that you can do too is you can also turn off sharing your information. So if you're concerned about sharing proprietary information or trade secrets when developing a custom GPT, you can turn that off so that information is not shared back to OpenAI, and that information is not being used to train any other large language models going forward. It's specifically for your internal clients, and that's super, super powerful.
So what you're adding when you create your custom GPT is then also being digested by the larger language model. So I may get answers from what you uploaded, even if I'm not using your GPT. Is that correct?
That can happen, and that's a concern. That's a concern for everybody. So yes, from a certain perspective, that definitely can happen. But there's some things that you can do to your account to try to prevent that as much as possible. One, you turn off data sharing when you create your custom GPT. Two, you turn off data sharing within your account at the account level of your chat GPT. So to do that, if we go over here to settings and data, we can go to data controls, and you'll see here chat history and training. If we turn this off, that will prevent our interactions with ChatGPT from being used in training the large language model going forward.
Now, you've obviously decided to keep it on.
Yeah, because I don't care. I'm not doing anything super secret, so it's fine with me. But if you're doing, one of the things when I speak to large organizations and like the State Board of Education here in Texas, you got to be cognizant of that. Because if a teacher is using a large language model driven platform like a ChatGPT or some of the other education specific platforms that are out there, they very well could inadvertently share information about a student or about their organization that you don't want getting out to the public. So you got to be very cognizant of that and be very aware of the information that you are passing, because yes, 100% with that button on, they can take your data and leverage it and use it to train some future models. Now, one thing, there's a caveat there too, Ross, that a lot of people overlook. Even if I turn that button off, I'm still operating under the exact same user agreement that I initially agreed to when I signed up for ChatGPT. So I have to sit back and go, I'm still under the same user agreement, but they're saying they won't use my data. Right. Okay. So that's just something you have to keep in mind. Is it really safe even if you turn that off? I don't know.
Yeah. So I take my same approach that I take to Facebook, which is if I can't publish it on a public setting, I don't publish it at all.
Yeah, that's exactly why mine's on. It's because, I'm not going to be doing anything that's squirrely or anything that's proprietary, even though the data that I'm using to drive Podcasters GPT, a lot of it is my data and a lot of the content that I've written over the years. It's nothing proprietary. It's just podcasting best practices. If you want to invest, it kind of goes back to the same thing of, if you want to launch a podcast, do you hire a coach to help you through the process, or do you spend your time sifting through documentation and YouTube videos and making mistakes and then learning from that? Do you want to streamline that process, or do you want to go through the iterative process yourself and learn as you go? It's the same thing with Podcasters GPT. You could compile this information on your own, but how much time is it going to take you?
Right.
Is it going to be accurate? Is it going to be the most latest and greatest information when it comes to podcasting? Is it going to be the most current industry standards? No guarantee there. But if you go to Podcasters GPT and you use my Podcasters GPT, I can assure you that all the data that I'm using to drive that GPT forward is current and up to date industry best practices and standards.
And there's no reason, if there's an area which you haven't addressed, again, it's still going to pull from the larger language model. So you don't have to switch out if you want to say input a script and say, give me 10 bullet points from this that I can use in a blog post or what have you. 100%. You can do that right within your customized. You don't have to switch out for something which maybe you didn't plan for. I'm not saying you didn't plan for that, but there's something's going to come along that maybe you 100%. Hadn't. But you can stay within that framework and still benefit from the larger knowledge base and the
100%.
Right.
And I got hit up by Cast Magic the other day on LinkedIn. When I published this on LinkedIn and was telling everybody about it, one of the reps from Cast Magic goes, "Oh, you have to let me know how it does as compared to Cast Magic." And if you're not familiar with Cast Magic, you upload your podcast episode and it generates, using AI, it generates titles, it generates show notes, it generates all the content you need to support that particular episode. And right. I had to tell him, I said, "Greg, that's not what this tool is designed for. Not saying it won't do it, but that's not what I built Podcasters GPT for. I built it so people could launch podcasts and grow podcasts." So that's the specificity that we're looking at with Podcasters GPT. If I wanted to build one specifically for doing that, creating post-published or post-recorded content, I got tongue-tied there. It's like saying GPT 10 times fast. It's very difficult to do. But if I wanted to develop a custom GPT for doing that sort of thing, I could do that. But that's not the purpose behind Podcasters GPT.
Yeah. And so what are some of the tools you use in addition to ChatGPT, whether they're AI tools or just general podcasting tools to get your show done and out?
Yeah, you use quite a few actually. So I'm a big fan of Filmora by Wondershare. They have some AI applications that they built into their editing tools as well. So we use those quite a bit. I am a huge user of Photoshop and Illustrator, and I got to tell you that when it comes to AI generated graphics and content, they are leading the charge. They do an amazing job. I mean, Adobe has crushed it in my personal opinion. Now, again, with DALL-E into ChatGPT, I was able to go and I had a subscription to Midjourney, and I was able to cancel that because DALL-E 3, in my opinion, is on par with what they're doing over on Midjourney, and it's much, much easier to use. So if I'm training someone on how to generate AI created images, I just stick with DALL-E because prompting over on Midjourney was some real prompt engineering to get some quality results. So I was like, all right, I'm done with that. But we use video.ai to also slice and dice our content. Video.ai, you can upload, say this episode's going about an hour long. We can upload this episode to video.ai, and they will chop it up into vertical video for us. And they'll usually generate out of an hour-long episode 40, 50 pieces of content. Wow. Now, the downside there is really only about 20% of those are really usable most of the time. Some of them are really kind of out there. But if I can upload that and it creates the vertical videos for me with my branding, with my templates, it's ready to go with captions and everything. And all I got to do is upload the video and I still get 10, 12, 15 pieces of content. It's worth it to me. So that's an amazing tool right there. I also love to use Claude, or Claude 2 is the latest version there. Claude is very similar to a ChatGPT, but from a creative perspective, sometimes it does a better job. So it also has a larger context window. I don't know if you've ever tried to upload content to ChatGPT, maybe a white paper or something fairly lengthy, and say, "Hey, summarize this for me," and you get an error message. Yeah, and it says no. That's because the context window is fairly small right now. So they use tokens in order to allocate resources or memory for you, and you're limited to 32,000 tokens right now with conversations with ChatGPT. Upload and output. So it's a pretty small context window. Claude's window is much, much larger. I mean, you can literally, and I'm going to date myself, but you could literally upload the entire Encyclopedia Britannica to Claude and ask it to summarize it, and it's not going to error out on you. Now, as I mentioned before, I love ChatGPT because they're the industry leader and they set the standards. As soon as the next iteration of ChatGPT drops, they've extended that context window as well to 128,000 tokens. So we'll be in the same boat as we are over on Claude. You're going to have a very difficult time giving it too much information at one time. But there's also ways around those context windows with plugins and that sort of. We didn't even talk about plugins today. But there's ways around some of the limitations that we're already dealing with ChatGPT that still allow you to analyze large sums of data as well. But yeah, those are some of the tools. Claude's great. Again, video's awesome. Adobe, anything there is really, really awesome for content creation.
Well, this has been an awesome hour. Thank you so much for joining us, Larry, and sharing so much wisdom about ChatGPT and about creating your own footprint there and your own customized version, as well as some of your tips for speaking and getting your name out there and so forth. It's really been a joy watching you over the last few years and seeing your growth and how you've really, like I was saying earlier, you said you said yes to a lot of stuff, and in the process, both your game and your visibility increased in a major way. So congratulations on all the success. And where do you want people to go to connect with you or to check out one of your many offerings or more than one?
Sure. You can go to the website, redhatmedia.io. Everything is there. And we're actually going through a revamp of the website right now. So I can't wait to roll that out. It's in development as we speak. But for right now, you can still find everything you need to find over there. All my socials are there. The book sign up is there. The podcast audits, everything is there. So
Do you still do graphic design for people, or you?
we do graphic design as well. Sarah does the majority of that for us, but Sarah is my business partner in Branded, and we work together to launch podcasts and do graphic design as well. You probably remember back in the day, I was doing one sheets even.
Right.
For speakers, yeah. So we have that offering, as we don't talk about it a whole lot, but Sarah does that, and she does an extremely good job. So we anything you need from a podcast or content creation perspective, we're right here for you.
Sounds great. That is Larry Roberts. Larry, again, thank you for joining us here on the StreamLeader Report.
Thanks, Ross.
All right. Great talking to Larry Roberts. Don't forget, every Thursday, we've got the StreamLeader Report live panel Thursdays at 1:30 p.m. Eastern. Not this coming Thursday because it's going to be Thanksgiving, but you can catch us. Rob Greenlee, we have Claudia Santiago and Rebecca Gunter. And, of course, you can catch all of our episodes on YouTube or on your favorite podcast app. For the great Larry Roberts, who joined us, and wonderful, wonderful conversation. I'm Ross Brand. This has been the StreamLeader Report. We'll talk to you again on another episode of the StreamLeader Report. Take care, everybody.